specific items that members wish to discuss. If there are any others, then please let me know. The first was the application by Surrey County Council for contribution towards the resurfacing of the Seven Hills Road. The second was the same applicant in relation to St George's Avenue. And then the third item relates to Cobham Free School. Are there any other of the items that any member wishes to discuss?
Will we have to go to part 2 in order to discuss those applications?
We'll ask. Can we ask the legal officer, do we need to go into part 2 at any point to discuss those applications?
Through you, it does very much depend on the route the debate takes. There's been some discussion at Cabinet in the public domain around some of the applications, one in particular, the Cobham Free School. There's some information in the minutes that are on the public papers, but there is some sensitive, confidential, financial and some commercial information in the grey papers that went forward to the Strategic Spending Board, which was not a public meeting. So if members wish to, if the debate goes into the minutiae of some of those applications, then we may have to go into part 2, but I think we'll just have to play it by ear, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. And then again, perhaps if I can ask the officers, on the basis that only those 3 items are for discussion this evening, can the other items that were approved or however they were dealt with, can those be released to go forward? So is there anything else that we need to do to allow those to proceed?
Again, Chairman, I think that would be for a decision to be minuted, to be recorded formally, what the decision is in relation to those other items, because the call-in does pick up all the items. I understand you're saying that the debate might be narrowed this evening, but we would still need to, you need to take a decision, the committee would need to take a decision in relation to those other items.
Okay. Perhaps then at the end of the meeting you can remind us of that. I think in relation to the 2 rows, and I think that there's a specific application, but there's the wider generic point around whether or not CIL money can be used for repairs to roads. Having looked at the correspondence between Ray Lee, the Strategic Director, and Trevor Pugh, the Highways Director at Surrey County Council, we seem to be narrowed down to the point that, in the view of Elmbridge Borough Council, it is not possible to use CIL money for repair work that is equivalent to maintenance rather than improvement. There is, and perhaps I can just read this so that there's no uncertainty, and if I get this wrong or you're not comfortable, then I'm happy to read out the whole letter. But in a letter to me from Ray, having asked the leader of the council, Stuart Sadek, what the administration's position was, and I'll read part of the letter. They feel strongly that the principle of CIL is to provide for improvement schemes that offset the effects of demands made by new developments, such as millions of pounds that have already been put into school improvements, road safety schemes, recreational facilities, etc. Therefore, without prejudicing the decision of the next Cabinet meeting, having considered all of the professional advice and recent discussions, as leader, Stuart could not support CIL funding of highway repair schemes. So that's my understanding of this authority's position. The Surrey officers, again, looking at the correspondence between Ray and the response from Colin Kemp, the Cabinet Member for Highways at Surrey, their understanding from previous meetings between officers was that Elmbridge did believe that funds could be used for these sorts of schemes, and that was why they submitted them in the first place. And I just read out in support of that view, if it is in support of it, an extract from the Cabinet meeting held on the 5th of July 2017, which is Appendix E in the papers. And it sets out the allocation of CIL and how that's to go forward. And it says, taken on receipt, administration will be 5% of the top slice, and sang suitable alternative natural green space 2% of the top slice, and then from the remainder 40% to strategic infrastructure project programme, 10% to maintenance projects. And the recommendation at the end of it was that 10% of community infrastructure levy be ring-fenced post-allocation to administration and sang for maintenance purposes. And in the text of the report, it says, in respect of maintenance projects, the need for maintenance of infrastructure, such as roads, due to the impact of development, has frequently been raised by residents through the local plan consultation. In this regard, it was proposed that 10% of CIL collected post-allocation to administration and sang be ring-fenced towards agreed maintenance pressures that link to development within the borough. So I think there has been perhaps some confusion in terms of what the authority's position has been in relation to whether or not CIL can be used for maintenance projects. There has in the past been CIL money allocated to the resurfacing of car parks, whether relining them to get a couple of additional spaces amounts to improvement or not, it may be a moot point. I think at the end of the day, nobody, and it's certainly not my wish or anybody's wish, that this authority acts ultra vires. We're either allowed to do this or not, and then the debate can be had on the merits or otherwise. It does seem to be perhaps politely a grey area. There does seem to be some room for interpretation of these regulations, and I think there are other authorities, examples of other authorities that have used CIL money for maintenance. I think the point I would make, the obvious point I would make, is at the end of the day, the public don't distinguish either between the responsibilities of this authority or the county authority, and indeed I don't think they mind too much from which public purse these sorts of things are sorted out, but sort them out is what they want to see, and that, I'm sure, as elected members, is our view as well. So I think it's fair to say that the point of dispute really has now moved or has narrowed to whether or not it would be ultra vires to use CIL for road maintenance, which is a different point from whether or not there's any merits to these particular two applications. And so to that extent, perhaps we can try and keep the debate at a broader level rather than specifically around those two roads. But we'll need to deal with those in any event. In relation to... Sorry.
Can you clarify exactly what it is that we're going to be talking about? Because my understanding is that we would be responding to the request for a review, and that it's those words there that matter, rather than some other discussion about how we're using CIL funds.
We're going to be talking about whether or not we're going to ask the Cabinet to review the decision not the Cabinet deferred the decision as to whether or not to grant any award of CIL in relation to those two applications, pending further clarification from Surrey County Council. There has been further correspondence and therefore clarification on the points that were raised. So the discussion is whether or not we believe that it is right for the Cabinet to reconsider or to consider further those applications and to address what seems to be now from the correspondence the main argument, which is irrespective of the merits in relation to those two particular roads, this is not possible to make an award of CIL for these types of applications. Mrs. Elmer.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to follow up on the point that you made when you spoke, and which Councillor Haig-Brown just mentioned. The actual reason for what we've got here in your handwriting, in fact, written on the 14th of March, what we're asked to do tonight, the request from 5 members for a review, was that the Cabinet did not give sufficient or appropriate consideration to the application and in particular those submitted with unanimous support of the local committee. So that's what we are debating, and you have just mentioned when you spoke some information which I was not previously aware of. You talked about a letter which you have in your possession which came from Mr. Ray Lee, and you talked about something. Is that a different letter to the letter that we were sent and which is on the public website? And is this letter that you referred to in the public domain, and is this letter, was it made available to the Cabinet when they made their decision? And I've got a further question, but I'd like those answers first.
No, it wasn't made. It wasn't. Post the call-in, there has been correspondence which is in the public domain, as far as I'm aware, including the open email from Ray Lee to myself, sent with the agreement of the leader. So as far as I'm aware, it is in the public domain. But that correspondence was to help clarify the issues that the Cabinet had asked to be clarified. Councillor Haig-Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to propose a motion, and I move that our decision this evening be no action. In other words, the first option that's in the list of recommendations.
Second that.
So what, you don't want any debate?
We can have a debate about about whether or not we decide no action.
Well, I'm sure other members will want to speak on this matter. This is about, what is in the interests of our residents, as much as anything else. And I don't think we should simply close down the debate. This has been called in because this 5 members of this committee would like to clarify what this council can and can't do. If at the outset Surrey had been told that it was simply not lawful, it was ultra vires to award CIL, then they wouldn't have made the application, is my understanding. The applications were made with the agreement not only of the officers and the CIL officer, but also of those borough and county members, including the deputy leader of this council, that attended that meeting. So that it was perfectly valid for them to make that application, and it's perfectly valid for us to review that decision, as I'm sure the Cabinet will want to do now there's been further clarification. I mean, if this committee doesn't want to debate the point, well, that's their right, but I would hope that we would at least have some discussion. Councillor Sheldon.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, if we open a debate, I would like to talk about the merits of using this community infrastructure levy for repair of some of the roads. Are we able to do that now? Have we got to go on with Councillor Haig-Brown's query?
Let me get some views first, and then we'll take it. Mrs. Capadia.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a couple of things. It's, as I've understood it from the call-in papers, which, as Mrs. Elmer said, were submitted in writing, it is whether the Cabinet actually, the decisions of the matter to be reviewed is the decision of the Strategic Spending Board, and the reason is that because 5 members felt that there was not sufficient or appropriate consideration to the applications and those submitted with unanimous support of the committee. So I'm not sure whether it would be appropriate in this forum. It would be appropriate in a normal ONS perhaps, but this is a special ONS that's been convened for the specific purpose of what is at Appendix A, and therefore is it appropriate for this committee to consider whether CIL bids for maintenance purposes or for resurfacing of roads is ultra-virus or not, because I've understood that's what you wanted to debate. I am not sure that it is appropriate. As for saying that we want to close the meeting down, or Councillor Hay-Brown, it is for Councillor Hay-Brown, of course. He's proposed the motion, but my understanding is that there is a debate to be had on whether the Cabinet actually did consider the matter at length or in with due diligence or not, because that seems to be the substance and the reasons for the call in. And just final thing, I believe it may have been a slip of your tongue, but you actually said that 5 members of this committee want to clarify. What I imagine you mean is 5 members of the call in is what you want clarification. Is that right? Okay.
It's quite apparent who the 5 members are, yes.
In terms of debate, I see no reason why we can't have a debate on whether the Cabinet, did look at this carefully, all the recommendations from the CIL board or not. Happy to have a debate on that. So unless Councillor Hay-Brown suggests that he wants to close it down, but he did indicate that he was happy to have a debate on that matter.
Well, let me be clear then, if I haven't been clear, that you're absolutely right, that the reason for the review was that the Cabinet did not give sufficient or appropriate consideration to the applications. Since that call-in notice was submitted, there has then now been further clarification of the reasons why, or the leader has indicated that, in his view, he could not support a CIL bid for those types of applications. So the situation is different. That we are now faced with this isn't an issue on whether those roads there's any merit in those 2 roads. It's my understanding what the leader is saying, and please I'll ask you to speak, is that actually irrespective that he cannot support it because it would be ultra vires. It's not lawful to do that. So perhaps Councillor Sellett, you can help us.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Obviously, I'm just as concerned as everybody in this chamber about the state of our infrastructure, and particularly the roads, and we do everything in our power to ensure that we deliver the best services to our residents. But subsequent to our meeting and subsequent to the call-in, I'm actually a member of the executive, the District Council Network executive. I asked all the members, and they are all senior councillors across the whole country, whether they had considered or would consider spending CIL money for basic road maintenance, and they all said no. I then subsequently asked the officers to ask the chief execs of the same district council network, and the same response: no, they wouldn't. I then asked all the Surrey leaders for their clarification of how they felt CIL money ought to be spent in this borough. Not one of them supported the idea of spending CIL money for basic road maintenance. So on that basis, I felt that the council could not stick its head above the parapet and go along with something that no other council apparently is considered or has considered And Surrey County Council, as far as I know, has not approached any other borough in Surrey for CIL money for this purposes. So on that basis, I didn't think this council could support those sorts of bids, and that is the reason why I wrote what you've just quoted.
Just to be clear, all of those conversations and that information was obtained after the Cabinet had met. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I think you were correct when you were saying that it could be quite technical in your opening remarks. I actually agree with Councillor Selleck on the use of the term basic road maintenance. I think that actually sums up the issue that we're faced with, because I looked, for example, at the website of the for the Community Infrastructure Levy, and that is quite clear. It is saying that deficiencies in infrastructure provision, it can't be used for that, except, and it says, unless those deficiencies will be made more severe by new development. And I think that's also reflected in the comments that you were reading out from the appendix in the document. So I think that Councillor Selleck has put his finger right on the key issue that we need to be thinking about, which is this basic road maintenance, or are we talking about future-proofing our road system, and this particular road, which has a lot of heavy pressure on it, are we future-proofing it for future development, as well as also taking into account the increased demand that must have taken place over the last few years because of the development that has taken place. So I think that, in my view, it's a question of, are we asking for basic road maintenance? And I think it's quite clear from the documents that basic road maintenance is not permissible. But on the other hand, road maintenance that is connected to development is permissible. And in fact, it's that sort of thing that I think is ring-fenced in our document. So that's my comment.
Mrs. Harding.
Chairman, I was just going to say, when I asked, that letter you're referring to, or email or whatever it is from Mr. Rayleigh, supposedly signed off by the leader, we haven't seen it. We've got no idea what it says. It may be in the public domain, but it didn't form part of our papers. We haven't seen it. And in fact, there is nothing in the agenda that refers to it as far as I can make out, and therefore no commentary on it or in any form of shape or form from officers is part of the agenda.
Councillor Selleck and Rayleigh, I thought it had been included as part of these papers. I've read out what I thought was the relevant bit. Councillor Selleck, do you disagree with that? Do you want me to reread it and see whether you agree with it? Or Ray?
Can I just clarify a couple of things around it? Can I just come back to a challenge you sort of put up for me at the very beginning, which is around, is the spending of CIL funds on highway repair schemes ultra-virus or illegal? I think Councillor Freeman touched on the grey area there is within the regulations, because in many ways you can make an argument that Seven Hills Road, as an example, is nowhere near any major new development and therefore doesn't qualify. You could also argue that any new development makes an impact on the highway network and therefore the major highway network needs retaining. So there is an absolute grey area. And if you ask me as an officer to say, is it illegal to spend on highway maintenance, I'd have to say no. Councillor Selleck is absolutely right, is that all of the authorities and, as part of the District Council network came back saying not only do they not spend CIL money on highway repairs, they don't think it's appropriate to as well. But that's not, again, to say it's illegal. At the end of the day, the CIL regulations give the decision to Cabinet. It's for Cabinet to choose where it decides it wants to spend its CIL money. And as officers, we're also very aware you could spend your entire pot of CIL money on highway repairs and not solve the problem. And yet you have an awful lot of other infrastructure issues around education and recreation and numerous other things that you want to fund that you would not be able to do for fear of simply funding highway repairs. So as officers, we have always been, and I have always recommended, and I know decisions have been made on various sorts, I have always recommended, I didn't think it was appropriate. I didn't think it was appropriate for maintenance funds to be, for CIL funds to be spent on maintenance schemes. I don't think it's appropriate now. I don't think it's in the spirit of CIL. But again, that doesn't mean necessarily it's illegal in that respect. That's something that one day I assume that lawyers will argue over when allocations are made. But this, I will just reiterate, is a decision for Cabinet. It's for Cabinet to decide how it wants to issue its money. And therefore, if you are having a discussion around that, it's about the appropriateness of that as a decision making. In terms of the email and discussion I had with the leader, you at the time said to me, could you just clarify exactly where you stand? And I did that to you in a similar way to what I've done to the committee tonight. And you asked if I could get some clarification from the leader on his view or the Cabinet's view on whether it would be appropriate in future to fund that. And Stuart quite rightly came back saying in his opinion as leader, he couldn't speak for the Cabinet because Cabinet haven't actually finalised the discussion on this yet. But as leader, he felt that this was not appropriate, and therefore that's what I reported back to you.
Thank you. I don't think that's a point of controversy. That was clarification which I asked for and indeed was given. And the only reason I've used the phrase ultra vires is because I've taken that from your letter to Trevor Pugh, where it says resurfacing is not an increase in infrastructure but maintenance and therefore could be considered ultra vires for CIL. I mean, the debate has moved on. There's no question that when the Cabinet considered these applications, I don't think at that time it was thought necessarily that CIL couldn't be used for this type of application, but clarification was sought, including on that very point. Since then, we've all gone away and done our own research, and I think we've broadly speaking come to the same conclusion. It may well be that no other authorities have done it, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't do it because the regulations are not as clear as perhaps we would all like. So and we can have lots of arguments on the technicality of what this call-in is about and what is the simple fact is, and we'll Councillor Woolgar will speak and then we'll start to take some decisions on how we move forward.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if the debate has moved on in the meantime, it would seem to me sensible that something had been done in advance for this meeting to warn the people who are going to attend it that the debate was going to be something else. I mean, we've come here this evening prepared to debate what was in the agenda of the meeting, and the goalposts have been very significantly changed. So, I mean,
the goalposts haven't moved.
It's not good practice, surely, to do this sort of thing for any meeting.
The goalposts haven't moved. We can have that debate, and I'm very happy that we do have the debate. Councillor Haig-Brown has suggested we don't do that. All I'm trying to do is help explain what has happened since the call-in notice and the clarification that's helpfully been given by the strategic director and by the leader of the council. So, but if you're all shaking your heads, please let's have the debate because we're here to look after our residents' interests. So let's not forget that. So, Councillor Woolgar, you start off.
Well, I mean, as I say, I've made the point that this is about or at least it's supposed to be about, how the Cabinet handled the decisions of the Strategic Spending Board. And as far as I can see, they handled it in a perfectly legitimate way. They weren't, although some of the members were present at that CIL board, there were a number of members who weren't, and they had to consider minutes of a strategic spending board where every decision had been taken unanimously, and it would have seemed very strange for them to overturn any of them.
Well, what they actually decided in relation to these two was to defer the decision. Let's hear some from other councillors. Councillor Donaldson first. Entitled to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Councillor Full Weybridge to George's Hill, I did a bit of research myself, like I always do, and I found this in my research, which contradicts what people are saying. Take Reigate in Surrey, and this is from their own website. States the number of Surrey County Council projects in this list was flagged at an executive meeting on 13th of July 2017 with a question posed of whether Reigate and Banstead is subsidising the county council. Councillor Schofield responded, no, we're not subsidising Surrey County Council. Surrey County Council is the major infrastructure provider in the borough. And he said the Surrey bids have been evaluated using the agreed criteria, i.e. the CIL criteria. And other councils in the UK, such as Porton Down, where £280,000 of carriageway resurfacing scheme, which was started last month and was funded by both the city and borough councils. 2 cases. And still more, namely Wandsworth, Southwark, Ealing and Reading. So these are all precedents set by borough councils, all acting without political bias on behalf of their residents. So I ask, what's the problem? Every day I get tons and tons of emails, many emails, protesting about the states of both roads. Now, you know and I know that Brooklands is the biggest industrial park in Surrey. Our roads weren't meant for it. Infrastructure. That's what we need, infrastructure. And we need the money to support these 40-ton lorries that are used by the likes of Amazon in distribution and so forth. And we discussed infrastructure only a few minutes ago, and that's what I'm protesting about. We're not supporting these warehouses and distribution centres in Weybridge, and they do go down the Seven Hills Road. I've seen it, and everybody else has seen it. So what I'm saying is that at the moment, these lorries, 40-ton lorries, are churning up our roads where I live in my ward. The residents are fed up with it because the roads are breaking up quite quickly with the small pothole repairs that we are currently doing. Residents' lives are at stake, and instead of resurfacing things like Churchfield car park, which in my opinion, it is my opinion, doesn't need doing, it's quite all right, and as far as I know, I haven't seen any potholes in Churchfield car park, use our CIL money as an infrastructure base to stop the churning up of our roads in our ward. And if we don't make a decision tonight, it'll carry on from May and June because of the election times. By the way, many cyclists have also complained to me, and they don't cycle on Seven Hills roads or in the surrounding areas like Brooklands roads or St George's Avenue. It's dangerous, it's deadly. We've already had 1 death in our wards, and I don't want to see any other, and I think it's very sad as well that when I hear ambulances can't get to their patients because of damaged tyres, and also nurses can't get to St Peter's Hospital because of damaged tyres, and I bet you've heard that as well.
I think that's...
So I think we ought to stop politicking, get on and resurface these roads because of infrastructure money, and I'm very disappointed that we haven't decided to do it already. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Elmer, I think you had your hand up.
Glad you let me speak, otherwise I was going to have a point of order. Now, it's all very well for Councillor Donaldson to sit there grandstanding. We're actually here to debate the motion. You are. Pardon? I'm sorry.
Please, try and keep this civilised. Mrs. Elmer, just make your point, please.
The point I'm making is that we are here to debate the reason for requiring a review. We're not here to reopen the bids. You, Chairman, made that point absolutely abundantly clear right at the beginning. So to have to sit here and listen to 3 minutes of somebody grandstanding trying to reopen a bid is unacceptable. That is my point of order. What I would like to say now, had I been able to speak as a member of the committee, I would like to say that we should now move on to Councillor Haig-Brown's recommendation that we debate that there should be no decision made today, in the sense that the Cabinet made the only decision they could have made on the basis of the information that they had available to them at the Cabinet meeting on the 14th of March. I'm one of the very few members actually in this whole chamber tonight, apart from those CIL board members, that was at the CIL board meeting. I'm very, very fortunate that I know a lot of information that many other members do not know. And it is all part two. Many members in this chamber know quite a lot of information. Quite a few members know some, and some members know very little at all about what actually happened at the CIL board meeting that you were also at, Chairman. So, I'll start at the beginning. We were debating just now whether or not the CIL board was right or wrong to make a decision on whether or not CIL could be allocated for funding for Surrey County Council highways. Now, in my view, that is not part of what we should be debating tonight, because that was not the sort of information that we discussed at the CIL board. I was an observer, I wasn't a member of the committee. What they were looking at, quite rightly, was the applications that came forward from Surrey County Council Highways. And in my view, all 6 members of the cross-party CIL board acted absolutely fairly, and they went through it with a fine-tooth comb. And we listened to the presentation by the Surrey County Council Highways officer, who was great. There's no doubt about that. He made his case very, very clearly. We discussed it. It was discussed. They came away with a recommendation after the afternoon session to defer the applications for further information. We've all got in front of us a copy of the Rayleigh letter, which was sent prior to the CIL board meeting. We also have a copy of a letter from Councillor Kemp replying in part, it is a holding reply I would contend, to the questions asked on behalf of the CIL board by the Strategic Director. We do not yet have the full information from the Highways officer, Mr. Trevor Pugh. I would contend that that information which the Cabinet had in front of them at their meeting on the 14th of March was the only information they could go on. They were not in a position to make any other decision than ratify the minutes of the Strategic CIL Board's meeting, which we were all at. Well, some of us were, you and I were, Mr. Chair. So we are in the position where we have the Cabinet sitting there. There are 8 members present that night. I think the leader was not present. I think Councillor Davis chaired the meeting. They had in front of them information which they then had to decide whether or not to agree. They agreed that the CIL board minutes should be ratified, and therefore it would, in turn, the information, once it was available from Surrey County Council, come back to the CIL board to be looked at again. That, I believe, is the right course of action. It is absolutely clear that we need further information that we cannot talk about because it's part 2. And, well, you close your eyes, Councillor Oliver, we're in the same meeting. So the fact is, questions were asked at the CIL board and were made. Some of the answers have now arrived. Once we've got that information, hopefully it will be public domain. I certainly hope it is made public domain. The CIL board can be reconvened and they can decide whether or not to agree those applications. I don't think there's any more mystery to it than that. And I think the Cabinet acted entirely appropriately, entirely responsibly, and therefore I think there is no further action at this stage, and I think we should vote on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Elmer. I think Mrs. Sheldon, you wanted to speak.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't think it's wise for us to have a post-mortem on what happened at the previous Strategic Spending Board, but I would like to have this opportunity here in a public domain to say that I was totally, and as you were there, you were seen, totally in support of the Surrey County Council CIL bid for money to be spent on resurfacing at that time the Seven Hills Road, St George's Avenue, and indeed many other roads in the borough could be eligible for such funding to be spent. The main dispute seems to be who should pay for this money. Should it be Surrey County Council or should it be Elmbridge Borough Council? We are aware that there's a very large pot of community infrastructure levy money, up to, I believe, something like 10 million. At the time of the meeting, it was £7 million. And we don't wish to go over endless debate about the amount of traffic that's going on these roads, but we have to realise that the leader spoke about basic road maintenance. This is not basic road maintenance that we're talking about. It's specific maintenance that is as a result of the development that's happening in the borough. Elmbridge has seen unusually extensive development in recent times, and we have to understand that every load of building material that's used by these construction vehicles, carrying foundation materials, glazing materials, steel, bricks, concrete, you name it, has been transported hundreds of tons through our roads in the borough. They're not built to carry these roads. They're not motorways, they're ordinary local roads. They're not strong enough. So subsequently, we've got the money through the community infrastructure levy from the very people who are doing the building, and we've got it in our funds. Most of our residents don't care tuppence they don't even know which council does what most of the time. They want to feel that this is dealt with, and they want the money to be spent and paid. I won't go into a post-mortem about questions that were asked before the Strategic Spending Board. The Deputy Leader did actually email the members of the board 10 days before the meeting with a whole series of questions that were not answered, despite lots of people asking for questions to be answered, and the letter was sent to Surrey within minutes, actually, of the Spending Board. So I think Councillor Elmer doesn't have her total facts to turn. This is a scrutiny meeting tonight, and it's therefore perfectly right that we should be looking carefully at what the decision has been made by the Cabinet on the 14th of March. I would therefore support the recommendations here on our agenda tonight that we ask for these decisions to be reconsidered as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, well, I think we've probably, I think we will, Mrs. Elmer's suggestion, your proposal, Vice Chairman, we will move to a vote. I would say to the Leader of the Council that I think it would be helpful after the May election, when the Council reconvenes, that there's consideration given to having the debate about the merits of the case of the Spending Board in public, because that is the case at the local spending boards, and I think perhaps that might have helped in this case if there had been more transparency in terms of that discussion. So I think maybe that's something that you might care to consider.
No, I'll certainly consider it, absolutely right. But the point I make about the board, I mean, we have a lot of committees and working groups, and we as members of that and members of the council, we rely on our fellow councillors to make decisions on behalf of all of us, which then comes back to Cabinet or to Council to be ratified. If we can't trust each other to make the right decisions, ignoring politics, I don't know where we go, because we have to rely on each other to make the right decisions. We rely on the local plan working group, we rely on the strategic board to make those decisions. I take on board what you would say, and I'm happy to reconsider it, but just as a point that those people on that strategic board, I was obviously one of them, we spent 5 hours discussing it. No stone was left unturned in terms of what we felt the questions had been answered or hadn't been answered, and the decisions. And the record shows that all the decisions were unanimous. And I said at the beginning, when you get, as a Cabinet, unanimous decisions, if there was a 3-2 or 5-4 vote, then yes, that would naturally bring the Cabinet to attention that something perhaps ought to be reconsidered. But the fact it was a unanimous decision on every application can only lead to one conclusion, and I wasn't there, the Deputy Leader was there, that the Cabinet had to endorse all those recommendations. Thank you.
I think, as I say, had it been known at the time that CIL couldn't be awarded for this sort of thing, then we could have saved an awful lot of public time and officer time in not preparing those applications. So just some advice piece from the officers. There is a third item that Councillor Brown wishes to raise, I think we finished the discussion in relation to the two roads. Is it best to take a vote on Councillor Haig-Brown's proposal that there be no further action in relation to those, or to do it all in one go at the end?
Chairman, just to clarify that the Vice Chairman's motion was in relation to
what
the two highways
request
issues.
for the review.
No, the whole lot.
Yeah. So I think we're not at that point yet, Chairman. If there's another matter to debate.
Sorry, I'm happy to have a debate about whether or not the Cabinet did its job correctly. We've heard from the leader what his view is, and my view is unlikely to be different or persuaded to be different by anything that anybody might say. But I just ask the question, is it worth spending time, having heard what we've heard, on debating further whether the Cabinet has done the job correctly?
Well, I think. Okay, so I think we have draw a line under those two applications. I think the Cobham one is a different issue because those two applications, in any event, will be referred back to Cabinet for decision. So I think perhaps Councillor Brown, if you want to raise your issues in that, and then we'll deal with it all together at the end.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, may I apologise for being late for your meeting. I would like to be able to blame the trains. I'd even like to be able to blame the state of the roads, but unfortunately I can only blame myself, having spent hours and hours looking through the papers and not properly read the front page, which said that this evening's meeting started at 7:15. So you and all colleagues have my apologies for turning up late. The issue that I would like to speak about is the one that I spoke about at the Cabinet meeting, and that is the application from the Cobham Rugby Club and the Cobham Free School, which was allowed in part by the committee. I wrote to the chairman of the Strategic CIL committee and the leader at the weekend to set out in brief what my points were. And I got a response this morning from the leader explaining to me that effectively there was nothing that he and the chairman of the CIL Strategic Board could do about it at this stage. We would effectively have to discuss it this evening. I think that constitutionally is the correct response. But I'd just like to take a little bit of the committee's time, if I may, just to run through why, in my view, this particular decision should be reviewed. As colleagues will be aware, this is a joint application between the Free School, which is due to open as an all-through school on the Munro House site on Portsmouth Road in Cobham in September 2019, and the Cobham Rugby Club, which owns the relevant pitch. The school has no room on its site for outdoor sport. They have enough room to build a small sports hall, but not enough for outdoor sporting facilities. And so the proposed agreement that was put before the committee is the only way that team sports like rugby, hockey and football can be played without expensive, time-consuming and polluting journeys for pupils going in buses to other sites. And the new pitch will also allow the club to increase its outreach to many other local state schools that will be able to use the artificial pitch. The Strategic CIL Board approved £471,144.87 out of a total bid for £795,338. Having looked at the minutes of the meeting, it seems that the main reason for not awarding more was because it was thought that the remainder of the funding ought to be sought from elsewhere. I've looked at this very carefully myself, and I'm satisfied that that is simply not possible. And in fact, in the bid papers themselves, it is stated quite clearly why it's not possible. The Rugby Football Union will not fund projects like this, and the club has in recent years used a large trust fund and its supporters' generosity to build itself a new pavilion, which was opened about 7 or 8 years ago. The result of having that pavilion is that it's massively increased the club's outreach in the community, and it also led to the Cobham Rugby Club being awarded the right to host 2 international teams during the most recent Rugby World Cup. The school itself has no funds. It's a state school serving the poorest area of Cobham, an area which shows up on national deprivation statistics. It doesn't have the kind of wealthy parents that you can get at private sector schools who can be asked to dip into their back pockets. Surrey County Council doesn't fund free schools or indeed academies, but the English Schools Funding Agency, which does fund free schools and academies, has a clear policy of not spending capital sums on sites which it doesn't own. So it will happily spend money to convert Munro House into a school. It will build a sports hall on the school site, but what it won't do is spend money on someone else's land. At the Cabinet meeting at which I spoke, the leader kindly advised me, or after the Cabinet meeting, the leader advised me to ask the school to bid for the remaining funds in the Cobham and Oxshott Local Spending Board's pot. Now, I don't know whether they've done that now, but I certainly know that if they haven't, a bid is imminent. I would hope that that would receive a successful outcome, but there is only £120,000 left to spend, leaving the project still short by just under £205,000. Without this extra money, the project simply can't go ahead. Also, the work has to be carried out in the closed season when the grass rugby pitches aren't being used, and the club will need to apply for planning permission. And the risk is that if the funding isn't available by this summer, the pitch will not be ready for the start of the 2019 school year when the free school open on the Munro House site. Now, I'm sure, colleagues, you have read the CIL regulations in the same depth that I have. They're extremely loosely drafted. However, there are some specific items which it's made clear that you can spend CIL funding on. Two of those are schools and sports facilities. And because this is a sports facility mainly for a school, the project falls foursquare into the two areas for which CIL money is specifically designed. The free school is an answer to a major problem facing Cobham and its surrounding villages, the fact that there is no secondary school in what is now quite a large town. There's a baby bulge making its way through the school system, and at the moment there's quite a lottery for school places in Cobham. Only part of the town is in the Esher High School catchment area, and even that is no guarantee of a place. And some parts of Cobham are not in any school's catchment area, and that leads to people moving out in order to get their children into their school of choice. Now, at the Cabinet meeting, the portfolio holder for planning suggested that this would be a lot of money to spend on just one school. I have some sympathy for that point. However, what I would say to that is this. This is a unique situation. This is a completely new school. Unlike a number of schools in our borough, it is not redeveloping on its own site. It's not doing a land swap with a developer. It has just found a new site, which is very good for a school, but simply doesn't have the facilities for outdoor sport. And as Surrey County Council have pointed out, it is a requirement for secondary schools to have an outdoor sports facility. And if they don't have their own, it means travelling somewhere else. So I'd also like to remind colleagues, if possible, that there is considerable external support for this project. Not only from the ESFA and Surrey County Council. There's supporting letters in the pack from Dominic Raab, from Sport England, the RFU, Surrey Rugby, English Lacrosse, who will be using this pitch and who already practice lacrosse on the rugby club's pitches. Cobham, in fact, has the largest lax club in the south of England. The Park School in Woking, Action Surrey, and the Old Tiffinians. There are also a large number of existing state schools that will benefit if this project goes ahead. One of the letters to the committee came from a lady called, let's get her name right, Vicky Alexander, who is the rugby club's community officer. The schools that they currently engage with in Elmbridge, in addition to Cobham Free School, are Fulbrook High, Hurst Park Primary, Cleves School, ACS Cobham, Danes Hill, Esher High, Manor Park, and the Esher Church of England School. The majority of those are state schools. If this pitch goes ahead, the prospect for further outreach and for other schools and other young people to benefit will be great. And far be it from me to criticise colleagues, but I do think that perhaps if it had been possible to spend a little bit more time on this particular application, it might have been better appreciated that this is one which does require full funding, and I would ask that either Cabinet or Council review it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding of the Strategic SIL Board is that it makes a decision which can be either to part fund, fully fund, or not fund an application, or indeed defer it. The Cabinet is not able to defer or amend Strategic SIL Board decisions. Unfortunately, the solution for your school is, as they've been told, apply to a different pot or reapply to the Strategic Spending Board. Is that going to be inconvenient for them? Yes, of course it is. But the reality is the Strategic Spending Board has made its decision, and that cannot be challenged. This is not a planning appeal or a tax appeal. There is no appeal against SSB decisions.
Can I just check, Mr. Chairman, that that is the considered view of the Council's legal officers, please?
Through you, Chairman, my clear understanding is the Strategic Spending Board makes a recommendation to Cabinet.
To make the decision. All the Strategic Board can do is make recommendations, consider and make recommendations to Cabinet. It's in Cabinet's gift to make the decision. It isn't under obligation to fund anything. It can, in using your initial words, it can choose to fund, part fund or not fund any scheme that comes through to it. It is not obliged to agree with the Strategic Spending Board. I think you as a council have always taken a view that it would be very unusual to move away from a recommendation of a Strategic Spending Board. But it is in that Cabinet's gift to do that should it choose.
Well, in light of that advice, then I think that the correct thing for me to ask is that the matter be referred to the next Cabinet meeting, inviting Cabinet to reconsider this application. Thank you.
So I think, Councillor Hagebrand, do you want to make your proposal, which I think is recommendation A, that decide no further action be taken. And can you just be clear whether you want that, you're proposing that in relation to all three of the applications we've discussed, or the first two, bearing in mind that the first two, the two roads, will be considered by Cabinet in any event in due course.
Thanks, Chairman. I move that the decision of this committee should be no action on the grounds that the Cabinet has made its decision and that's it. Yes, the Cabinet has made its decision in respect of the three items.
And do we have a seconder for that, Mrs. Elmer? Sorry, Okay, Mrs. Okay, so we'll go to a recorded vote then, please. The proposal is that that this recommendation from this committee that there be no further action taken in relation to any of the three applications we've discussed, in which case the decision of the Cabinet may be implemented without.
Sorry, Chair. In that instance, to reflect that motion and to capture all the other decisions, perhaps the vote could be in relation to all items, as just for tidiness.
I was going to do a second one for that, but that's fine. So, okay, so to be clear then, the proposal is that there be no further action taken in relation to any of the recommendations from Cabinet. Mrs. Bardia.
For clarification, if you're taking a recorded vote, through you to the legal officers, make sure that I've understood it correctly. We are voting on the first of the three alternative recommendations on the agenda.
Yeah.
And if we vote for, then we are voting in agreement with the first recommendation. And if we vote against, so is that right? Thank you.
The wording of this isn't great. So, I mean, I think the proposal is that no further action be taken, in which case the decision of the Cabinet, so the no further action be taken and the recommendations of the Cabinet stand. Or, yeah, could you do that?
Okay, I think it's helpful because the important thing is the next sentence, in which case the
if we haven't changed the recommendations, then I think that's it. But let's see what the officer recommends.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Councillor Mrs. Lyon is correct. Basically, the recommendation that has been put forward to the committee is to decide that no further action be taken, in which case the decision of the Cabinet may be implemented without further consideration or delay. So I will now ask each member of the... I will now ask each member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee here tonight, either they're going to be for that motion, against the motion, or they're abstaining from it. So I'll do it one by one. So, Councillor Tricia Bland. For. Councillor James Brown. Against. Councillor Christine Cross. Against. Councillor Glenn Dearlove. Against. Councillor Michael Freeman. Against. Councillor Nigel Haig Brown. For. Councillor Mrs. Anne Hill. For. Councillor Tim Oliver.
Against.
Councillor Graham Walker.
For.
Councillor Christine Elmer. Councillor Shweta Kapadia. For. Councillor Mary Sheldon.
Against.
And Councillor Tanya Shipley. For. 1 moment, I'll just count up the results.
So there were 7 in favour of the recommendation and 6 against, so the motion is carried. Is there anything else that we need to do to make sure that... No? Is that it?
The legal grey areas or wherever we stand. One thing nobody's ever brought up here is we do have a moral situation where we're protecting our residents, and that doesn't seem to come to light. And I'm sorry to bring this up late, but we have to make decisions considering the public as well, not just what's going on.
Can we just let him finish his speech,
You know,
please?
If we sit back, we just step back, do nothing, and there's going to be an accident. Not if there's going to be an accident, there will be an accident. And I feel very disappointed that decisions have been made and we've not really considered the public. I just wanted to say that.
Well, I think the leader and the cabinet have all been in attendance at this meeting, and I'm sure they'll have taken on board some of the discussions, and it will go back to cabinet, whoever forms that cabinet after the election. Mrs. Hill, unless there's a new point, I'm going to close the meeting.
Chairman, if I may, I would not have spoken if Councillor Dale hadn't said this, but the fact of the matter is that actually at this CIL board meeting, and that is in the minutes, so it doesn't matter if I say it, at the CIL board meeting, Surrey Highways officers indicated that the safety on our roads is the responsibility of Surrey County Council, not of this council. That is Surrey. So if Surrey have got roads which are unsafe, then Surrey had better do something about it. And it may be a moral issue, but we really have only very limited funds, Councillor Taylor.
I made that point at the outset of this meeting that